I was deliberately abandoned by my brother, even though I'm a wealthy heiress. His reason? He wanted to give a poor girl a home. So, I was taken to a remote countryside, and the poor girl was brought back as their adopted daughter. 6 years later, I finally escaped back home, but there was no place for me anymore. My brother, afraid that his past actions would come to light, hit me with a car at the adopted daughter's suggestion, killing me. Before I died, he whispered with disdain in my ear, "Vivian just wanted a home. Why did you have to come back and force her out?" When I opened my eyes again, I'm back to the day my brother first became interested in that poor girl. At the dinner table, I acted clueless and confused. "Gary, why were you fighting and undressing with that poor girl in the gym today?" My brother had fallen for a newly transferred poor girl at school. She looked delicate and pure, but her body was hot and sexy. He wanted to give her a home. And so, I lost my home, got taken to a remote countryside, and endured hunger, insults, and humiliation. After 6 years of enduring and struggling to escape, I found no place for me at home, and he killed me. Before my death, he still had to twist the knife. Vivian just wanted a home. Why did you have to come back and force her out? That was my home, and I was the one forced out. It's laughable how their love required my sacrifice. So, I decided to strike first at the breakfast table. "Gary, why were you fighting and undressing with that poor girl in the gym today?" Mom and Dad were shocked. Gary turned red, coughed, and glared at me harshly. "Just eat and stop making things up." In my past life, I would have shut up whenever he showed that expression. Because he was Gary, I had to respect and love him and couldn't make him unhappy. But he was my closest kin. Why did he have to be so cruel? Since he didn't act like a human, I wouldn't show mercy either. I blinked my long eyelashes innocently and said, "I'm not making things up. I saw it with my own eyes and heard you making noises. Were you fighting too hard? How could you, as a man, bully a girl? That's too much." Gary was furious and tried to hit me, but Dad was quicker. He slammed the table and, holding back his anger, said, "Gary, explain this right now." Gary was shocked and shouted, "This is all a misunderstanding. I wasn't in the gym yesterday. Selena must have mistaken someone else for me." Mom chimed in, "Selena, did you mistake someone else for Gary? He wouldn't do such a thing, right?" Gary glared at me and said, "Don't say irresponsible things just because you're young." I replied angrily, pouting, "Who's being irresponsible? There are cameras in the gym. We can check if you don't believe me." Dad immediately agreed, "We'll go to the school with you and your brother to see who's lying." Gary shot me a threatening look, but I just met his eyes and smiled slightly. Dad drove, Mom sat in the front seat, and Gary and I were in the back. Gary kept texting the whole way until we got to the school gate. Then he relaxed and shot me a smug look. I cheerily said, "Gary, you've been busy texting from when we got in the car till now." Dad glanced over, and Gary quickly pocketed his phone. "It's about the basketball game with some classmates." He then stopped provoking me, hurried over to Mom, and clung to her arm affectionately. I walked slowly behind, arms crossed, feeling a pang of sadness looking at the familiar campus. In my past life, I dreamed of this school countless times and cried into my pillow. Dad once said whoever was better between me and Gary would get the family business. But he said that when Gary skipped school, fought, and failed everything. It was an act of desperation, a joke to me, as my parents, who favored boys over girls, never even showed me cheap love. So why would they give me their lifelong effort? So, I worked hard to get into a good university, hoping to build my own career based on my abilities, but Gary ruined it all. He drugged my milk tea and had me abducted by human traffickers after I topped the class. The result for a 16-year-old girl taken to the mountains was predictable. One moment, I was the happiest person in the world, and the next, I was in hell. This time, I'll make them pay. The gym was quiet early in the morning. The security cameras were just 10 meters away in the security office. Suddenly, a clear voice rang out, "Watch out." A ponytailed, energetic girl leaped to block a volleyball heading toward me. Upon seeing her, my hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The pain brought my body back to life. Vivian. Gary's beloved poor girl. She orchestrated my abduction and stole my 6 years, even caused my death. I remembered watching from a distance as my parents hosted a garden party with her, introducing her lovingly to everyone. This is Vivian, so sweet and sensible. She's more than a daughter to us. She lived in my room, used my things, and completely replaced me. Even that wasn't enough for her. She brainwashed Gary into killing me so that everything at home could belong to her. Hi, Gary. Good morning. Did you bring Uncle and Auntie to see your basketball practice? Vivian greeted cheerfully, her smile bright. She wore tight, light-colored workout clothes that showed off her gorgeous figure. Her entrance was stunning, even impressing my well-experienced parents. Gary started acting. Thanks, Vivian. If you hadn't blocked the volleyball, we could have been in danger. Vivian brushed her hair aside, smiling. I was just passing by. The basketball court is over there. What are you doing here with Uncle, Auntie, and your sister? Gary gave me a cold look and snorted in disgust. Enough, he said. I don't know what kind of crazy thing my sister's talking about. She said she saw us fighting and taking our clothes off at the basketball court yesterday afternoon. Vivian's pale cheeks instantly flushed. She seemed a bit angry. Selena, you can't just make stuff up because you're younger than us. That's too much. Gary chimed in from the side. Totally. My sister loves to slander me. This isn't the first time. Then he hugged Mom's arm and said, Mom, Dad, this is Vivian. She's the captain of our school's volleyball team. She's really good, even won some awards at the state level. Even though she's from a poor family and didn't have the best resources, in just 6 months, she's become one of the top 5 students in her class. The teachers tell us to learn from her perseverance and good character. Man, that image she's pulling off is really impressive. Dad and Mom looked at her with more admiration. I smiled slightly. The school didn't have a volleyball club before. They just made one up to admit Vivian because her grades weren't good enough for the state contests. Any high school student can join. Out of 30 participants, she placed 17th. And being in the top 5 in the class was just because there was a leaked exam paper. Vivian's smile froze instantly, and she paled. Gary's temples bulged, and he gritted his teeth. Selena, if you keep talking nonsense, I'm going to pull your teeth out. I shrugged, looking innocent. What? Can't we tell the truth anymore? If you don't believe me, we can ask any classmate. With that, I waved over a group of girls who were busily practicing their English reading. Hey, can you come help us for a second? Being eager to help, they quickly ran over. I immediately asked, do you know Vivian from class 3A? What do you think about her? The girls started chattering away. Their words came so fast that no one could cut in. I don't know her personally, but I've seen her bully younger students in the bathroom. She's got a bad temper, yeah, even though she's from a poor family, her clothes are expensive. Bet she used the poor student designation to get in because her grades weren't good enough. Liking volleyball is fine, but why does she always play in short skirts on the basketball court when there's an actual volleyball court? She's just making stuff up. Anyone can do that. Gary's face turned grim. Vivian's eyes welled up with tears of frustration. Selena, I don't know what I did to you, but now you're getting your friends to spread lies about me. I shrugged again and smiled broadly. My friends? How could I have known you'd bring the volleyball team to the track early this morning? How could I have known you'd play the hero? Of course, I knew. Those classmates of mine were close friends, and the script was well rehearsed. Just because my brother can text doesn't mean I can't. Vivian gave me a vicious look. Only we knew the truth, that I'd played her. Seeing the doubt in our parents' eyes, Gary quickly spoke up. Truth can't be faked. If we need proof, let's check the surveillance footage. Dad nodded and led the way to the surveillance room. Of course, parents checking the tapes is no big deal. With the right time and place, the footage was quickly found, but it was blacked out at the critical moment. The security guard scratched his head in confusion. How did it break? These cameras were just replaced last week. Gary had a smug look in his eyes. He'd already had Vivian delete the footage on the way here. I smirked. Every other camera works except that one? That's quite a coincidence. Mom and Dad's faces didn't look too good. Vivian immediately shifted blame. You probably deleted it to frame us. Gary frowned and backed her up. You were ready for this, huh? Just because we fought the other day, you had to resort to these tactics? You're ruining a girl's reputation. Mom's face turned dark. Selena, this is too much. Apologize to them now, and don't do this again. Dad, meanwhile, glanced silently between me and my brother. Vivian smirked at me smugly, but I grinned back. Did she really think I hadn't planned for her to delete the footage? Who gave her that confidence? Gary chipped in, let's just drop it. I'll let it go this once. Before he could finish, one of the girls cut him off. I've got the footage here. We were using a camera for English reading practice and recorded everything. The USB is right here. She excitedly pulled the USB from her pocket and plugged it into the control panel. Sure enough, the screen showed the events at the sports corner from yesterday afternoon. The footage showed the girls reading English, and then bouncing away after they finished. Next came Gary and Vivian sneaking in and beginning their fight while taking off their clothes. You're amazing, Gary. I love it, came the overly sweet voice from the video, which made even Mom's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Gary quickly tried to grab the USB, but the girls blocked him, yelling whenever he tried, "What are you trying to do? Don't touch us. That's scary. Gary, are you a pervert or something?" Gary was trembling with rage but couldn't act. Desperate, he signaled to Vivian, who stepped forward to snatch the USB. My reflexes were quicker though. As soon as her hand touched my arm, I fell sideways. My pained yelp caught Mom and Dad's attention. Vivian's outstretched hand was undeniable evidence. Ouch, my arm feels broken. The girls immediately shouted, Vivian's hitting her out of anger. She's done this to younger students before, but to do it in front of their parents? That's brazen. This is so disgraceful, doing this at school. This noise caught the attention of many classmates jogging outside. All the little heads peeked in, looking at the control panel and making enthusiastic comments. Vivian was brought in by Gary himself, and they were much more wild in private. There was one time in the library that was even more thrilling than this. Dad was so furious that veins popped on his forehead. He raised his arm and gave Gary a hard slap. You beast. How could I have a son like you? Mom pulled out the USB drive, tears streaming down her face. You've really let us down. Gary held his slapped face, angry but not daring to speak, listening to the mocking from outside. His eyes were burning with fury. He had always been spoiled since he was young. So what if he was a brat? There were still many people eager to please him. That's why he cared a lot about his reputation. He didn't mind being exposed for fooling around, but he felt humiliated by the slap from his dad. Vivian sat on the ground, looking desperate. This completely killed her chances of entering my family. The teacher soon arrived, shooed away the onlookers, and took us to the office. The principal and the vice principal were both there. Though they didn't look pleased, their eyes were full of flattery. Dad was a board member, donating $3 to $4 million each year. If this matter hadn't blown up, they might have just scolded Gary privately and told him to break up with Vivian. But now, things had escalated. Gary had embarrassed his parents, and they needed to make some harsh comments. This matter is out of our hands, Dad said. Principal, you handle it by the book. The principal, being shrewd, understood immediately. Some students reported before that Vivian wasn't of good character. She often hung out with shady men outside the school and even bullied classmates and stole test papers. So she will be expelled this time. As for Gary, since it's his first offense and he typically performs well in school, he will only receive a verbal warning. If it happens again, he will face expulsion too. Hearing this punishment, Vivian quickly shouted, No, I can't be expelled. Gary, speak up for me. Gary wanted to help her, but when he looked at his dad's fierce eyes, he chickened out, bowing his head in submission. Gary was grounded, because this incident spread widely among the circles, totally disgracing his parents. In the midterm exams, I scored top of the grade, at least giving my parents some face back. They started bringing me to various family banquets. They began formally introducing me to the big shots in their circle. In the past, all these resources were in Gary's hands, and he truly acted like a big deal, arrogant and overbearing. But I was different. I valued the things I earned through hard work. I was good with words and had a great memory. I remembered every person my parents introduced to me just after one mention. So, within half a month, the circle praised me as well-behaved, smart, and excellent, with a bright future. Only then did I gain a place in my parents' eyes. After being grounded for half a month, Gary came out, even gaining 4 or 5 pounds. How could he not gain weight? Not having to go to class, lying in bed playing games every day, too comfortable. Mom served him some food, saying tenderly, "The past is behind us. From now on, listen to your dad and no more troublemaking." Gary obediently replied, "Mom, Dad, I know I was wrong. I'll focus on my studies from now on." Dad snorted coldly, "If you can stop disgracing us, we'll thank the heavens." Then he served me a piece of beef. "Selena, I heard the upcoming math competition is tough. Are you confident?" I smiled warmly, "Dad, I'm your daughter. Don't underestimate me. I'll get first place for sure." Dad was overjoyed. "Isn't that a lot of pressure?" With my chin held high, I said proudly, "If there's no pressure, it means the award is hollow." Dad ruffled my hair, laughing heartily, "Good, that's my daughter." Mom also approved, "Getting first place this time, not only can it add points to your college entrance exam, but you'll also make it to the newspaper in this family joy." Gary sat aside like an outsider. His eyes narrowed, staring at me with coldness and discontent. This cold treatment was a first for him, and it made him very resentful. He couldn't understand why, in just half a month, his parents' attitude towards me had changed so much. I gave him a slight smile. If he had come out half a month later, it would be even more different. At this moment, a servant rushed in hastily. "Sir, ma'am, something terrible has happened. There's a group outside led by a woman named Vivian, claiming to be the young master's girlfriend and that she's pregnant with his child." This was like a bolt from the blue. Parents were shocked, and Gary was dumbfounded. Then came the sound of chairs scraping as they strode out. I continued enjoying my breakfast. After finishing, I leisurely walked out. The doorway was bustling. Gary was kneeling, his eyes red. "Dad, Vivian and I are truly in love. She's even pregnant with my child. Please let her in." Vivian, too, was crying pitifully. "Uncle, Auntie, I know you don't like me, but the child is innocent. Are you really so heartless?" Mom was standing next to them, shedding big tears. Onlookers chimed in, "The deed is done. Are they trying to deny it? I heard he's a high school student. Good thing he's of age, or they'd get arrested. Either they give her a proper place, or give her compensation, otherwise, young lady, take them to court." Dad's face turned ashen. He hated being threatened more than anything. Vivian quickly shook her head, choking on her words. "Uncle, Auntie, don't worry. I won't take Gary to court because I love him just like you both do. Before, I didn't understand, but now that I'm becoming a mother, I deeply understand your difficulties. If you don't give us your blessing, I'll break up with Gary, but I'll still give birth to this child. It's my last memory with Gary." Her words were quite moving, at least enough to touch Mom's heart. Dad said coldly, "Fine, she can enter the family, but the child cannot stay. Having a child at 18, where would he show his old face?" He looked at Gary with extreme coldness. At that moment, Gary lost his qualification as an heir. Gary wanted to speak, but Mom glared at him. "You're still young. You'll have plenty of children in the future. In the afternoon, I'll accompany her for the abortion. We'll buy her an apartment as compensation." From now on, she'll live at home. With this guarantee, Vivian naturally agreed. Getting into our family in exchange for a child was so worth it. Gary, of course, wouldn't refuse either, so they settled the matter. After the drama, I had to go to school. Dad reached out to help me with my books and said meaningfully, "Selena, you have to study hard, okay?" I nodded obediently. It was then that Gary finally reacted. He clenched his fists tightly and glared at me. I turned back and gave him a provoking smile, mouthing, "You lost in this life. I trust no one, not even my parents. The only person I trust is myself." I studied like crazy, getting up at 6 every morning and going to bed at midnight. I had to make sure I could get into the best college in the country. That way, even if something unexpected happened, I could still live well. The kidnapping crisis was now resolved. Dad's driver would pick me up and drop me off at school. The driver was a retired soldier, very skilled. Each night, Dad would have me read in his study and then talk to me about business matters. This used to be Gary's exclusive privilege, but now he couldn't even enter the study. Every time he saw me walk into the study, his eyes were filled with resentment. After all, I had Dad's favoritism and support. His chances were only 30%. What did he have to compete with? However, Vivian was smart. She came in with a humble attitude and did everything to please my mom, securing her position. As for my dad, she tried to please him too, but Dad just didn't care for her and treated her like a servant. So, she gave up on Dad and me. She and Gary didn't dare to touch me. But she knew how to leverage her position. If she didn't have a windfall, she'd create one. She started showing off wealth on Facebook, flaunting her love with Gary, building up an image. True love can cross class barriers. My husband is the son of a publicly listed company, and I'm just a Cinderella from the slums. Thank goodness we were brave enough back then. You are my true love warrior, and I am your unwavering lifeline. They became a high-profile couple, good-looking and inspiring. They even paid for 2 weeks of trending topics, becoming instantly famous. Fans flooded the comments with compliments and envy, boosting their confidence. While I was winning second place in the national math competition, they set up an influencer company, hiring influencers to build their brand and start selling goods. To give credit where it's due, Vivian had a business mind, much better than Gary. Seeing them making money, Mom started bragging to Dad about how great Gary was. After all, she thought boys were the backbone. She even instilled in me from a young age that I had to treat Gary well, otherwise, I'd have no one to support me when I got married and was bullied by my in-laws. It was ridiculous. Mom had a good education, yet her thinking was so outdated and traditional. As a woman, she looked down on women. But she was also pitiful, a product of that era's culture, raised with these ideas by my grandparents. Invisible chains are the deadliest. At dinner, Dad openly praised me at the table. Selena got first place in the province and second place nationally in the national math competition. Very impressive. Some of the old guys in our circle are already booking her as their future daughter-in-law. It's funny. Dad rarely talked this much, clearly very pleased. These old guys were the top of the social pyramid, and having their approval made Dad proud. Mom also smiled and agreed. Of course, Selena's always been good at studying. Even with a fever, she'd make it to the top 5 in her grade. But Gary's also doing well. Though his grades are average, he's smart with his live stream sales, making over $3 million in just over a month. Who knows what he'll do by the end of the year? Gary and Vivian raised their heads proudly, waiting for Dad's praise. Dad sneered dismissively, $3 million isn't even enough for his annual expenses. Gary's smile immediately froze. Dad, that's not fair. Even after studying, you need to start a business to make money. Dad glanced at him coldly, with a sneer. True, you took over $50 million from your mom and made $3 million. Just enough for bank interest. But the bank has no risk. Your business has risk, so it's better off in the bank. Gary's face turned ugly, and Vivian spoke up. Dad, that's not fair. It's slow to make money when starting out, but it'll grow once it's on track. Dad ignored her and casually took off his watch worth over 3 million and handed it to me. Just focus on studying. Don't eye your brother's earnings. Whatever he makes each month, I'll give you the same. I blinked. Dad, this watch was a gift from Grandpa. It's very meaningful. Mom also tried to intervene. Honey, is this really okay? Dad chuckled. Why not? It'll be yours sooner or later. Do you know who got first place nationally? Calvin, with just 3 more points than Selena. Mom's face lit up. Then it looks like our family has a path into high society. Though our family was one of the top businesses in a city, we had no way into high society. Gary and Vivian's faces darkened, their eyes filled with hate and malice. I gave them a faint smile. So, it's about leveraging the wind? Who doesn't know how to do that? Mom and Dad's net worth was in the billions, not caring about a bit of petty change to them. Reputation and status were everything. If I could help the company flourish, then it was destined to be mine. In this lifetime, I knew the math competition questions by heart, so why settle for second place? Because I cheated. I discussed the final question with Calvin before the exam. His approach was wrong, so I provided the correct one, ensuring Calvin got first place. When the rankings and grades were announced, he approached me. Why did you do that? You get your first place, I'll get what I want. What do you want? Inheritance rights. I can help you, but next time, we'll compete fairly. All right. With just a few sentences, Gary's streaming career was doomed to fail, no matter how briefly it might shine. Dad was never supportive, so naturally, he wasn't going to provide any resources. Mom really hoped Gary would succeed in his career. Even if the company wouldn't be his in the future, she wanted to build a kingdom for him, so she spent money like crazy, with ads everywhere, and even paid big bucks to sponsor a national variety show. But it was still all for nothing. When Mom ran out of her savings and asked Dad for money but got rejected, Gary's streaming career finally went bankrupt. I texted Calvin to thank him. Calvin, it's nothing. Just some pocket money for a small goal, otherwise, I'd have to dip into my stash. That's what it's like for top-tier rich kids. Gary, having a rough time with his career, and Vivian started to mess with me, especially since I took first place in the final exams and ranked first in the province. Dad not only rewarded me with a villa in the city center but also took me to the most important annual gathering in our circle. Gary and Vivian had changed clothes and were ready to go but got stopped by Dad at the door. I'll take Selena. You two don't need to go. Having been under Dad's pressure lately, Gary was upset and retorted, Why? You always took me before, and I am your son too, Dad casually replied. Now you know you're my son. When I asked you to listen, you didn't. Now it's too late. Gary's face turned livid with anger, and Mom wanted to speak up for him. I slowly said, Mom, let's go. It'd be rude to keep the uncles waiting. Mom hesitated for just a few seconds, then patted Gary on the shoulder. Take Vivian out for some shopping. Get whatever you want, I'll cover it. Just because you failed this time doesn't mean you should be disheartened. Start again, Dad and I will support you. The message was clear, the future of the company was in my hands, so he should go start his own thing. Gary was so mad that veins popped out on his forehead, and his eyes were filled with malice as he looked at me. I smiled slightly, knowing this was the last straw that would break the camel's back. He was about to snap. At the banquet, I became the center of attention because Calvin invited me to dance, and I was his only dance partner. The uncles in the circle were very warm towards me, introducing me to their children so we could connect more in the future. Everyone had a great time because we were all heirs and we were all excellent. This time, I had top-tier connections. No matter what changes came, I could build my own empire. Selena, the wind on the balcony is strong, be careful not to catch a cold. I turned around and took the coconut juice Calvin handed me, smiling lightly. You're so good to me, next time in the math competition, it'll be hard for me not to let you win. Calvin said helplessly, we agreed to compete fairly next time. Don't look down on me like that. I blinked, you've been number 1 since you were little. It'd be embarrassing if you got second place. Calvin said flatly, winning by cheating is what's really embarrassing. I touched my nose, that's why I don't feel right taking the first place. Calvin and I clinked glasses gently. I'm giving you some insider info, consider it a token for our next fair competition. I immediately pricked up my ears. When dealing with Gary's company, I found out Vivian had sticky fingers and was quite close to one of your dad's competitors. Be careful, they might destroy what they can't have. I lifted the corners of my mouth, that's really good news. In addition to the hint from my parents that the company would be mine to inherit, that was indeed the last straw for Gary. I wanted not just the company, but for him to have nothing. Dad had a lot to deal with usually, doing most of his work in the study where many confidential documents were. No one but Dad and Mary, the maid who's taken care of him for over 30 years, were allowed in the study. I could only enter if Dad called me. So, no doubt, Gary and Vivian would aim to sell the confidential documents to rival companies to destroy the company. Soon, several products about to be launched by our company were put out by competitors at lower prices. Dad's face was livid for more than half a month. He scolded the company's top management, yelling at them about how they handled secrecy and insisted the mole must be caught. They cried that they had checked multiple times, but hadn't found anything through the company's surveillance, computers, or internet traces. After another half month, it continued, and the company lost over $2 billion that month. At the dinner table, since Gary was asking Mom for investment money, Dad just exploded. Before, Gary asking for money was routine, with Dad occasionally making sarcastic remarks, but always giving the money. All you know is asking for money. Everything you invest in fails. It's disgraceful. Gary retorted, didn't Dad fail a lot in the early days too? If you hadn't inherited Grandpa's company, you wouldn't necessarily be successful now. What met him was a slap from Dad. Gary cast a resentful look at Dad and me before pulling Vivian out. Mom sighed in frustration. That night, I knocked on the study door. Dad looked tired, rubbing his temples. Selena, what can I do for you? I handed him a cup of hot tea and said gently, Dad, I've heard about the company's issues, so I asked Calvin. Dad perked up a bit. What did he say? I blinked. He said the leak might not be from the company, but from home. How about installing a camera in the study? Dad's hand paused as he held the tea cup, his face turning dark. I added, Calvin also said not to go soft on this. Dad's gaze deepened as he looked at me with a complex expression. I stared straight into his eyes without flinching. I made this up, and even if Dad asked Calvin, it wouldn't be a problem. After all, Calvin had taken the blame for me plenty of times before. Selena, if your brother did this, what would you do? Dad asked. I replied with a question of my own, and who am I in this scenario? Dad's eyes were intense as he said, the future heir of the company. Calmly, I replied, prison. A minimum of 10 years. Dad sighed, he's your own brother. I remained unfazed. Being the heir isn't just about yourself. You have to think about the thousands of employees who have families of their own. Being responsible for one person is family, being responsible for many is being a leader. But even when he gets out, he'll still be my brother, and I'll ensure he's well taken care of for the rest of his life. Dad nodded, satisfied with my answer. He was worried I might be too cold-hearted, neglecting family, or too weak to handle the responsibilities of being an heir. That night, Dad secretly installed surveillance in his study. Only he and I knew about it. Next, Dad deliberately mentioned a new blockbuster product at the dinner table, claiming it was about to launch. Dad played his role well, inviting designers over for 3 days and discussing it over meals. Perfect. Gary took the bait, showing up punctually for dinner every day. Afterwards, he'd sit with Mom on the sofa watching TV. Mom praised, Gary, you've grown up and are spending more time with me. Gary smiled sweetly, because you're the person who loves me most in the world, Mom. Of course I'll spend time with you. As they displayed their mother-son bond, Dad and I watched coldly from the sidelines. Vivian, meanwhile, was busy with her own ventures, flaunting her properties and cars, even provoking me. Don't think that inheriting the company makes you so great. The company is shaky right now. Maybe when you take over, it'll be an empty shell. Even if you manage to get through this crisis, you'll still be making money for me and your brother. Do you know how many houses and cars I own now? Enough to squander for the rest of my life. I smiled slightly. Well, let's wait and see. A week later, in the afternoon, as I was arranging my school supplies, I suddenly heard Dad's furious shouting downstairs. I went down and found a crowd of curious servants gathered at the study door. Inside stood several company executives and designers. Gary's face was swollen from a beating, blood trickling from his mouth as he knelt on the floor, in a pitiful state. Vivian knelt nearby, pale and shivering. Mom, seeing me, clutched my hand, her eyes red from crying, as if I was her last hope. Selena, your dad dotes on you the most. Please persuade him. He's about to beat your brother to death. It's just a minor leak. Gary has admitted his mistake and promised not to do it again. Can't we let it go? He's your son, after all. I walked over to Dad and made him a cup of tea. Dad, let's cool down. The damage is controllable. Have some tea. Dad took the cup, his hand trembling. Clearly, he had been quite angry and had hit hard. Selena, what do you think we should do? This was a chance for me to establish authority in front of everyone. He didn't want to be the villain. Mom sighed in relief, assuming I'd go easy. Selena, you and your brother have always been close. Gary was just momentarily foolish. Just scold him a bit. Vivian jumped in. Yes, Selena, give him a break. Even Gary seemed to relax. The executives, however, looked disappointed, shaking their heads. Everyone thought I'd let Gary off. I smirked, my eyes full of disdain, and slowly said, though he's my brother, the law is the law. Call the police. There were gasps from the crowd. Gary shot to his feet, eyes red with anger. Why? I'm your brother. I lifted my head, firmly, but you broke the law. If you were in need, there might be some justification, but you're not. Your actions are pure willfulness. How many innocent people might lose their jobs because of your recklessness? How many live in constant fear? They could be supporting entire families. Gary, you've profoundly disappointed. Meth executive's gaze grew warmer, some even on the verge of tears. Vivian quickly tried to shift the blame. It's because of you. All this should rightfully belong to Gary, but you took it. He's just retaliating. What's wrong with that? I looked at her coldly, mocking her. You seduced Gary in college, then got pregnant to force your way into our family. That's why Dad gave up on Gary. You forced your way in, turning from a poor student into a millionaire within half a year. This is all because of your greed. Although Gary and I never had a special bond, I knew he cared for Mom and Dad and this family. He would never destroy what Dad worked so hard to build. Dad found out that 2 months ago, you got close to a competitor. You've been facilitating this all along. Vivian's face turned pale, but before she could respond, Mom slapped her, yelling, I knew my son wasn't this cruel. It's all your fault for turning him into this. You tramp, I'll beat you to death. Gary tried to intervene, but Mom, in her rage, yanked Vivian's hair, slamming her head into the cabinet. Vivian tried to fend off the blows but accidentally pushed Mom into the cabinet, causing a gush of blood. Chaos erupted, cries, curses, and people trying to mediate. I stood by the window, enjoying the sunset and the pandemonium. I called the police and an ambulance. Soon, sirens wailed outside. Police and medics arrived, putting an end to the chaos. Vivian was beaten the worst, having no family shields like Gary. She was left bloodied and beaten up. Mom didn't defend Gary anymore because she was covered in blood. Her life was more important. At the hospital, Mom called me heartless but mostly cursed Vivian. Mom wasn't badly hurt, just a minor concussion. But Vivian had 3 broken ribs and her face was disfigured. On top of that, she was going to prison. 2 months ago, she had stolen company secrets. The profits were enough to get her 20 years in prison. She'd have to sell all her assets to cover the company's losses. So in the end, all her efforts were for nothing. When she saw me, she was furious. "Selena, you bitch, you did all this, didn't you?" I slightly smiled. "You're not as dumb as I thought." "Oh, and I arranged for some friends to keep you company in prison. They'll take good care of you." Of course, I don't play favorites. I also visited Gary in prison. His head was shaved, and he looked thin and miserable. He stared at me through the glass, excited. "Selena, get me out, I'm sorry. I won't fight you for the company anymore, it's all yours." I rested my chin on my hand and smiled slightly. "You really are dumber than Vivian." At least she knew this was all a setup by me. "You're still clueless. You are such an idiot." Gary went wild, his eyes full of anger. "You bitch, I knew it was you. I'm gonna tell Mom and Dad, they'll make sure to kill you." I played with my watch, smiling with pleasure. "You're not getting out. The moment you went in, it was over for you." He started crying like a madman. "I'm your real brother, you can't do this to me." I sneered. "If you know I'm your sister, why were you planning to sell me off to the countryside?" He was shocked. "How do you know that?" I smiled. "Your beloved Vivian told me. She said everything to save herself." "You're so dumb. Did you really think she loved you? Do you know how many men she slept with before you? Even while with you, she cheated on you several times." As I mocked him, Gary went hysterical and started smashing things. Prison guards had to drag him away. On the day of the trial, Gary and Vivian crossed paths. He took a sharpened toothbrush and stabbed her in the stomach. Blood splattered all over him, and he had a crazed look. "You bitch, you cheater. You sold me out, you deserve to die." My brother was supposed to get 10 years tops, maybe even less with some favors, but now, he was never getting out. Mom fainted after witnessing that. She never mentioned Gary again. Dad acted like he never had a son and focused on grooming me to become the CEO. Vivian couldn't be saved. She died. Gary was sentenced to life in prison, no parole. I arranged for some tough guys to take care of him in there, making his life miserable. After the math competition, Calvin came in second, right behind me. He looked at me intensely. "Congrats." I smiled. "Thanks, but I'm done competing. No one will challenge you for first place anymore." He scoffed. "Then what's the fun in that?" Everything went smoothly after that. By my junior year, I was guaranteed a spot at a top college. By senior year, I was working at Dad's company, learning the ropes. 4 years later, in winter, on the same day as my death in my past life, Gary died in prison. At home, it was a joyful celebration. While he froze in his cell, everything was just perfect.